Welcome to another episode of B2B Marketing and More, and big hello from Raleigh, North Carolina. Today, I am talking to not a marketer, but a sales professional. Ryan Staley is the CEO and the founder of Well Boss, and he is a fantastic and high-performance salesperson. So welcome, Ryan.
Happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me on, Pam.
All right, Well Boss, what a wonderful name. Can you tell me where your company is named from?
It seemed like a natural progression because essentially over the last, 6.5 years that I was in the corporate world, essentially I had to grow a team. They're like, hey, Ryan, we want you to move up market. We want to move up market and create a team. And I'm like, okay, what's the go-to-market strategy? They're like, go figure it out. I'm like, what's the sales playbook? So they're like, go figure it out. I go, where's my team? They're like,
Go figure it out.
you don't have one. Go figure it out, right? It was a good company, but very scrappy in terms of resource availability. And so what happened is we grew from adding really, really large customers. So we added, I think it was close to over 35, $500,000 plus contracts, a $20 million contract. And we basically grew the business unit from 0 to 30 million in annual recurring revenue in 6 years with only 4 salespeople. So I'm like, okay, well, what I want to do for my future when I left there is help companies close these really big deals and implement the sales systems to do that. That's where the name came from.
Awesome. So you capture whales and big whales all the time. And obviously that means the big deals and big dollars. Obviously, you have been in sales all your life. Can you tell us what are some of the tips and tricks to be a good salesperson?
I would say most people make the mistake of focusing on what just the company wants,
You're talking about what the customer wants?
what the customer's company
Okay.
wants, not the customer as an individual themselves. And here's what I would tell you is like, I've done the entire gambit. Half my career, I was a salesperson. Half my career, I was a sales leadership, being a vice president of strategic accounts when I left. And really, like, the key things are people are trying to sell, let's say, larger deals. One of the things that a lot of companies or people focus on, or sales reps or sales leaders, is like, hey, the ROI for the company is this. They're going to save millions of dollars. They're going to do this. But one of the things that they forget is, how is that individual person evaluated at the end of the year when they sit down with their boss and the year just finished? Are they going to get a bonus or are they going to get demoted? And did they hit on what they were supposed to? So that's the tangible business side of it. But then also it's like, what is that solution going to do emotionally for that person that you're selling to? Because logic is how people make decisions. Emotion is what creates action. And so those two kind of triggers are key things to look at when you're trying to work and sell. So I would say that's number one. Number two is just ask really, really good questions. That's one of the advantages that sales has over marketing, is we can actually physically talk to the people versus like looking and getting feedback from communities and social. You can actually talk to the people and ask them specific, tangible questions on the outcomes they want, what's bothering them, all those details. So I would say just being a ninja at asking really, really good questions that are thought-provoking and that make people question thoughts that they've had previously.
The number one thing you are talking about, I love it very much. You basically said is not what company wants. You focus on how that decision makers or the prospects that you talk to specifically, what will impact them. You kind of take care of their needs and also take care of in terms of how they will be evaluating. On the marketing side, do something similar. Is like understanding your customers well. I think you're doing that as a salesperson. On top of it, I love you hit the core in terms of like asking good questions. When you ask thought-provoking questions, you actually get people to think and say, you know what, I didn't think about that. Now, if we take that into account, is the solution that we are evaluating right now makes a lot of sense. So I love that. That's actually great. So with that being said, my next question is, when you get to know a prospect and you start asking thought-provoking questions, that's great because you know them already. But cold calling is very hard. So how do you go about doing that? Reaching to the prospects that you don't know to get them to be interested to talk to you. How do you go about doing that?
I do elements of cold calling. Cold calling could fit in a lot of different buckets. That could be social interaction. That could actually be picking up a phone. That could be texting. That could be email. That could be direct messaging. So there's a lot of different channels that you do make that a reality. And so what I would say is that the number one most important thing to do, because like it's funny, Pam, my first job, it was an inside sales position.
I know how hard that job is. I supported inside sales for a while. Man, it is a hard job.
What I would tell you is the number one most important thing is relevancy to what stage that company or person is in. And so I would start with relevancy is probably the most important thing. And then the other is don't be spammy.
True.
Like I just got this today and it happened. And I could tell when I'm on like an auto sequencer from someone, they're just like,
I can tell, my radar is on. I was like, yeah, that's an auto sequencing mail.
the person reached out and like, hey, we have this new SaaS solution. This is what it does. We're interested in your feedback. And then they send me the same kind of like canned robotic message. And then they send it to me again. And I go, listen, I have no idea what you're talking about or like what the outcome you're looking for. Please take me off the sequencer. Like I literally say that. So I would say relevancy to the stage, where people are at, what they're doing. For example, there was a deal that my team was working and the reps were full cycle. And so they had a prospect. They didn't have like an SDR team or we didn't have any marketing support. So they had to find a way to get into these really, really big Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies. Well, one of the companies they're trying to get into was Walgreens. And Walgreens is like Fortune 10. So they're even bigger than big, right? Well, what happened was Walgreens just recently merged with Boots. This was, I don't know, maybe 4 years back. They just merged with Boots, and their CEO and chairman identified in their press release that the number one priorities and outcomes from the merger is gain quote unquote synergies, where they're going to get $500 million in synergies from merging the companies. What they were saying basically is they're taking $500 million out of the business in cost. One of the levers we hit on to get in there was to link to that initiative that the CEO was talking about.
Because it's top down. It's coming from the management, top down.
So that's a good example of how to hit on that. You could look at 10Ks, you could look at other financials if you want on that. The letter to the CEO and the annual report is great. Obviously, that doesn't scale for smaller mid-market companies, so there's different strategies, but for big, big deals, that's what I'd recommend.
I think the biggest takeaway from your answer is if you do cold calling, yes, it is very hard. It's not easy job, but you have to do your homework. You have to do your research. Find a way to talk to them and then make that relevant to them. The next things I want to ask very quickly is have sales engagements changed during pandemic? For longest time, the salespeople, they prefer face-to-face, they prefer in-person visits. Obviously, we can't do much of that during pandemic. How did you adapt?
If you're in a sales process and you're selling, even if you're in mid-market, like let's say it's a deal $40,000 average contract value or annual contract value 30 or 20, something that's not just like a one call close type
Yeah,
deal.
it require multiple follow-ups. Yeah.
Yeah, it's multiple touches. And so one of the cool things that you could do is really try and connect with that person emotionally about something every single call that you have with them. And what I kind of look at it is a little bit like it's kind of like layering and finding a little bit more about the person, a little bit deeper every single communication touch point that you talk to them live. Why that's so critical is because pre-pandemic, that's what happens at the lunches, the dinners, the in-person meetings after the big meetings are done.
The wine and dine. Yeah. Hmm.
Well, it could be wine. It could just be coffee. It could just be anything. It's just connecting with people at an emotional level. And so what's happening, I see people jumping from Zoom call to Zoom call to Zoom call to Zoom call, and they're really not taking the time to understand what lights that person up at an individual level or why they're really doing what they're doing. They're just focused on business, 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 business. Then they just get looked at as a number. When they need to get deals done, things go dark. So there's a lot of really, really big problems that happen if you don't develop that relationship, even if it's remotely only.
What you are trying to say is, obviously, before a pandemic, the salespeople can do a lot of in-person visit. They can actually have a coffee. They can actually take the client out, and through a very informal social gathering, you get to know the person, and that you need to translate or convert that into to do something similar, but in the virtual communication. And sounds like what you are suggesting is during the call, make an effort to find out who that person is as an individual.
A real specific example, this is the number one question that I coach people to say, because like as a VP, I would have to pop into deals and find a way to connect with someone within minutes, right? After never meeting them after the rep. And I kind of cracked the code on it. And one of the key questions you want me to share with you, is that cool?
Sure, that would be great.
Is basically like, what's the number one thing you like to spend your time on outside of work? So what people mostly say is, well, kids or family. They'll just say, I just spend all my time on kids or family. It's like, okay, well, if you're not spending time with kids or family, what's the number one thing you like to do, like for fun or as a hobby or whatever? And like, I can't tell you the stories that get unlocked from that. There's an executive at a multi-billion-dollar company I asked that question to, and he went on like a half-hour discussion about how passionate he was about photographing waterfalls and how he took 2 vacations a year to see different waterfalls across the world, and they had a separate Instagram account. And so it just really opens up that person's passion and allows you to connect with them as a real human being, as opposed to just at a business transaction level. And then there's ways where you could stack other things on top of that. And so think about it. If you're doing this every single step along the way, you have 5 interactions with them. That's a completely different experience after 5 or 6 times versus someone who just, goes through the business motions of it.
How do you mix personal questions along with the business question and to keep that conversation going?
There's the standard sometimes downtime, like when you first start or towards the end, where there's opportunities to do that. It's always easy, and it depends. There's different flows to it, right? Every now and then there'll be a person like, okay, we'll just get to this, right? But what I would tell you is there's a lot of people that aren't like that. I mean, I would say the majority, like 90% plus, aren't like, just get to it. They're open to talking and they want to enjoy conversations, and especially because they're in front of the computer a lot. It's not as much as it was at the beginning of the pandemic, but they're a lot. So they like to enjoy the time in front of it as well. So people are definitely open to the conversations.
That kind of engagement, that kind of personal interaction needs to be done by sales. If you actually have a marketing people supporting you, they cannot do that on your behalf.
If you're doing like, and it's so funny, I heard Kyle Lacey talk about this. He was a CMO at Lessonly. And one of the things that he kind of identified is having almost like a joint service level agreement between marketing and sales.
One last question. What are some of the sales people's pet peeves that we should know? Like if you guys are like sometimes in the zone and we should not be talking to you, or you guys are working on a big deal and then, everybody in the situation room and there's a war plan. So is there any kind of pet peeves that we should know that is most of the salespeople have?
What I think probably be the biggest one that I've seen when it comes to sales and marketing is sending out a bunch of content that isn't anywhere near aligned what the sales messaging is or what's a priority.
That's a great point. And in my workshop, I usually talk about content mapping. You need to map the content to sales stages, understand how salespeople sell, and then also the type of question they tend to address at different sales stages. And then you customize the content specifically for that needs. All right, very good. I only have 3 minutes of your time. I want to ask you one silly question. So what shows are you binge watching right now, and do you recommend it?
I'm not like a super big binge watcher, but there's 2 shows that are on my radar. One is like totally stupid humor called The Righteous Gemstones. It takes a unique person to enjoy it. It's kind of like from the Kenny Powers world, and it basically is Danny McBride, John Goodman, and it's basically like a joke on the mega churches with a preacher and his family. It's so ridiculous and so over the top.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming to my show. Much appreciated.
No problem, Pam. Thanks for having me on.
If you really like the episode, like the topics we talk about at the B2B marketing and more, please subscribe and comment. Love to hear from you. All right, take care. Bye.
Never miss an episode of B2B Marketing and More by following us here on YouTube, and leave a comment while you're at it. You can also find episodes wherever you get your podcasts.